This is Unboxed by Aramex, a podcast series of compelling stories and cultural perspectives. This time, our guest on Unboxed is Rana Hajirasouli. Now, Rana is the founder and the CEO of The Surplus, two S's, and we'll find out a little bit more about that in a bit. But there is a long list of things I'd like to run through quickly. She is a climate tech innovator. She's a systems thinker. She's an active advocate for climate positive action. She's a recognized keynote speaker and much more. And here she is. Rana, lovely to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to come to all of those things and more as we move through the conversation. But I want to start by going forwards a little bit to where you are now with The Surplus, if that's okay with you. I kind of mentioned a little bit about it, but it's your connection to Aramex, where we are in the HQ now, but it's also a fantastically, and I don't mean to put it this way, simple but incredibly cool idea. What is it?
So I think starting off with it's simple is really important, actually. It is simple. The concept is basically a digital sustainability exchange for small to medium enterprises to capitalize on all of their excess resources, gifting it, exchanging it, sourcing it, selling it, and all of the rest of those good circular business models to drive extra profitability with what they have. So think of assets, materials, idle stock, even knowledge within an organization to generate that sort of value that they might be missing out on while reducing their climate impact as well.
So let's take it down to a really simple example. If you had extra, I don't know, warehouse space, or you had a room, a little studio like we're in now, you could offer that to somebody that doesn't have it.
Exactly.
Dead simple. So you won a competition, hundreds, I think maybe even thousands of entries. Maybe I don't want to over-egg the pudding, but this was scale up. So Aramex held a competition. This was for SMEs. You end up victorious. How did that feel?
We were shocked, honestly. It's been almost a year now, and I don't think we can quite believe it because there was some amazing startups there. We met them at the event, and what we really realized was quite humbling, I think, because over the years we've realized these types of competitions is great because if we win the competition, so do the startups and the SMEs within our membership base as well. So they benefit from this. So if we do well, we can give back more to them.
Sure. So where did the idea come from? How did the seed germinate, if you like?
So I think initially I grew up in the UAE, and the UAE was a beautiful place back then, but also resources were scarce. We're still regionally in the middle of the desert.
Sure.
So I think the idea of appreciating resources and not wasting was something that was very natural to many of us. And I'm no exception to that. But what really struck a chord was a personal story. It was a few years ago. Essentially, my dad had suddenly passed away, and I was very close with him. So it took a bit of an emotional turn, and I was a little bit, taken off my feet during that time, especially when I found out the reason why he had actually passed away. So there was actually a defibrillator component shortage, and when the paramedics got to him, they weren't able to sort of obviously respond in time. Fast forward a couple of months, we found out that there was excess defibrillators in a clinic storeroom just 2 blocks away, but they couldn't have any visibility over that.
Right.
So that got me thinking, and I suppose the strange way my brain is wired, that was my own grieving process was, what are all of, what is the scale of this excess and these resources we have no idea about? Can they save lives? Can they help businesses thrive? And what would a completely transparent system of excess resources look like if we were to take it forward as a business?
It's often the way, isn't it? The trigger for a really good idea comes from a darker place, a sadder place. And if you're able to turn that into a positive, it's a really impressive thing to do. A year down the line from winning the competition, where are you now with The Surplus?
So I don't really like to, kind of bloat, but we've had our fair share of challenges.
I think this is the chance for you to blow your own trumpet. Right? I've got to be honest.
So we've had challenges, obviously. So we've been at sort of scale-up stage. So since we won the competition, it gave us a great platform. It gave us some great connections. We have some great collaborations now, which we're sort of progressing with Aramex as well. As you know, reverse logistics is a very big problem for the circular economy. So we're solving for a macro level problem through partnership. And we're sort of on track to about 50,000 companies in 4 jurisdictions now, versus having only presence in the UAE. Yeah, so now we're seeing kind of traction in Italy, in Denmark, and potentially Kenya within the next few weeks as well.
I didn't expect that. Oh, okay. That's a whole lot more impressive than I thought. That's in 12 months.
Yeah.
Where are you going to be in 24 months?
I'm not a huge fan of projections. Like I like to say with an educated guess is I actually have no idea. We could only make some baseline assumptions. But yeah, we're hoping to reach sort of 200,000 by early 2027. That's our target.
Okay. What's the best moment so far? What are you most proud of? What connection, if you like, are you most proud of?
I think, to be honest, it's when we receive phone calls, it's a bit more personal, right? Because all the, members obviously have a relationship. It's not just about, the resources and the machine, right? Because everyone's talking about AI, but there are people using this platform and their businesses are being impacted. So when, my colleagues or I receive a phone call and they're like, thank you so much. We had no idea this went through. They're really happy. They want to share their happiness with us. We're able to keep our small family businesses doors open. Those are really the moments that, we feel are really important. And we are B Corp certified. So we're genuinely, the impact is so important. And while the financials are as well, I think they're secondary to, the stories we sort of hear from the case studies.
You get a real kick from it, don't you?
We do get a kick. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can see it in you. The thing is, the surplus paints kind of a pretty small picture of you, really. I've been looking into some of your background, and I went through your LinkedIn page, and I'm trying to kind of condense your educational qualifications. And I've got to be honest, I'm quite a reader, and I'm quite good at concentrating on text. But your educational qualifications, I couldn't follow. There are so many there, and I'm really interested in that path, if you like. Let me just list a few things for you, and if you don't mind fleshing out the rest. Audio engineering, BA majoring in political science and sociology, Trinity College Dublin, Master of Laws, Middlesex University Dubai, Master of Philosophy, International Peace Studies, with a focus on water security, Trinity College Dublin, Master of Public Health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University. That's just a start. So what's led you there? Because I mean, it's very impressive, but there's a pathway, I guess. There's a story.
I suppose so. I think for me, learning has always sort of been, it's been a love language, really, if I want to get personal about it. I feel that, the biggest gift we have is the ability to learn. So as soon as I would kind of scrape together a bit of money and I was working, I'd take the courses part-time. So I've been working since I was, 17. And all of the money I save up goes directly towards kind of pursuing a more structured way of learning, I suppose. I do like structure. That's something perhaps I'll get to in some time. But now I found the area that I think has a really interesting implication. All of this sort of commonality has always been about the allocation of resources. I think it's just I wanted to get a bit more refined around that space and to really understand what I'm really passionate about and what can actually contribute positively rather than just being an armchair academic. So now I'm actually doing my PhD in engineering at Cambridge. And that's been quite, great. It's given me opportunities to pursue an industrial fellowship. So I get to also, sort of engage with the practical side of things. What does circular economy look like? Get a bit more geeky in terms of the nitty gritty, and also focus on industrial resilience rather than just sustainability. So that's been what I've been up to over the last sort of year.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you how you get to the next course. I mean, is it just, oh, there it is, I quite fancy that. Is that how you do it, or is it intrinsically linked to the course you did before?
The courses I did, I think they're not really. So again, my brain works in a very particular way. I see everything as interlinked. So international law governs the way that we look at resources. Right. The way that we disseminate resources ultimately impact public health, such as look at the way that we're prepared for COVID-19 pandemics, the rise in dengue fever because of climate change. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to better understand all of the puzzle pieces and how they actually work together. And I suppose that's how it sort of brought me over to if I want to build a solution, it has to be something that takes all of these into account, and the core of that is resource allocation, basically.
Right. Because I was kind of looking through this thinking, oh, who am I talking to today? I was a
She's
little
a
bit
bit of a nut,
intimidated.
isn't she?
I'm thinking, oh, how do I follow this? But I mean, there clearly is a very structured approach, and you seem to have this ability. I think this is what I'm saying, to look ahead and to anticipate where you want to go next, even if you're not sure where you want to go. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. So that's just a small part of you, I guess, the surplus. The larger part is the education side. Let me ask you about lessons that you've learned, because you've learned a great deal. The wisdom, what's propelled you to, the success that you've had in the surplus in a very short space of time, and what the studying's led to. You clearly have a thirst for knowledge. Everything we've talked about seems to point to somebody with purpose. You're not a person that gets up in the morning thinking, I'm going to make money. You're getting up in the morning thinking, how can I do better? How can I go further? Seems reasonable. So with that in mind, what does success mean to you? How would you define success, do you think?
That's a really good question. And I often do think about that. I think even the way that we look at success in, I suppose, let's say a work environment is actually very similar. It's almost like a projection of what we want to be able to accomplish for ourselves as individuals. Mm-hmm. So I think success for me is actually making a positive impact. It's generating a sense of autonomy for the people within our network. And, when I'm, dead and gone, to leave something relatively stable behind that people can actually still use usefully. And I use the term usefully because we create a lot of stuff. We have, a lot of gadgets, a lot of products and services, and these fulfill basic needs. But there's something I think a bit more kind of, perhaps a bit philosophical on my approach, is that the impact that you actually generate in society will ultimately lead to certain negative outcomes. And if those negative outcomes can be lessened and we can stop focusing on the negative and increase the potential positive impacts, that can actually be something that is an indicator of success. How do I measure it? I don't measure it on a daily basis. I suppose I kind of reflect a couple of times a year and say, well, where am I at now? What have I done? Have I done something useful for my colleagues? Have I given them an opportunity to, lead fulfilling lives? Are they able to translate some of that over into some of the customers that they serve and the people that they meet? Because, work takes up a substantive portion of our time. And I feel that if you are able to take that same discipline in your personal life, then you can actually reach those sort of, personal goals a bit faster as well.
What about where that comes from? Because the feeling of being useful isn't universal. Everything has its place, I guess, but really useful stuff, really useful ideas, really useful people are rarer than I guess we'd like them to be. Where does that ethos come from? Is it family? Is it something that where does the drive come from?
I think obviously my background is Middle Eastern, and I suppose you'd call us collectivist societies. So and you see a lot of parallels between indigenous communities, collectivist societies, and what we really do see as a common denominator is that how can I be happy alone if I accumulate wealth and happiness and all the rest of these, resources that people strive for if my community is suffering? So I think that's something that's intrinsically linked to some of our backgrounds and the way that, collaboration and helping each other and that sort of like family link, not that you have to be blood relatives, but your broader community is really, really quite core in what we do. So I think there's obviously some psychological question marks in terms of, Western psychology is like, is that enmeshment? Is it a problem that you get upset, if your neighbors are not having a good day? It's not, I suppose to that level, but I think there's a real link there with, in order for you to be able to, reach a relatively happy place in your life, you should be able to, also make sure that your community is also benefiting from, whatever that you're able to kind of bring into the table, if that makes any sense.
It does. The surplus is really like it's a business network. It's a sharing network, isn't it? That would be kind of loosely the definition. What do you like at networking? That when you walk into the room and
I'm awful.
Everybody. I was going to say, because I'm rubbish as well, and
I wouldn't guess that.
I don't,
you seem really good.
I'm terrible. I'm okay at kind of asking the odd questions and maybe listening a little bit sometimes, but it's a very intimidating thing, isn't it? When you're not good at that.
No, I'm
honestly?
actually terrible. People think I'm good, but again, like a bit of a background about me. So I got actually late diagnosis. It's something that I never even heard about before. It's apparently Asperger's syndrome, and it's a sort of, I suppose, autism. It's on the spectrum, and I didn't realize. So I have a lot of these quirks, and it takes a long time, especially as a young woman, in a business male dominated sort of business atmosphere, right? In terms of deep tech and industrial. So it takes a lot of energy out of me to actually network and show up publicly and be normal. I feel extremely exhausted at the end of the day. So I think it's something that we all have to sort of, it's important to push yourself outside of your limits. But I think a lot of people get quite surprised. I come across as very extroverted, but I'm very introverted. It takes a lot, it takes like 80% of mental energy for me to actually get there and just do what everybody else finds very easy.
Yeah, maybe those are the best kinds of people, the introverted people who actually think stuff through rather than are all surface. I don't know. But then again, you said the word normal there. What's normal?
I think it's our perception of what we think is socially acceptable, right? So like I don't shake hands, and everybody in this room saw this when I walked into this podcast. And at first people are like, okay, that's a little bit weird, but it's just something that makes me anxious, and I'm not shy about talking about it. So it's these small quirks that they're very deeply embedded in our social etiquette, in social norms, and that's what we establish as normal. It's only common practice to be polite and greet people a certain way, talk about certain subjects. Like I can't talk about the weather, but if you want to sit and talk about polymetallic nodules or climate change, we can go off on a rabbit hole for about an hour and a half. So these are the types of things that, I think come across as perhaps quirky. I've been called quirky before, but we've just kind of come to accept it. Different isn't always bad.
Quirky is quite an apt description, I have to say. But it's interesting that you say that, because when you came in the room, I kind of did my usual bounce up, put my hand out. You said you don't shake hands, but you explained. I'm not offended by that. It's fine. Culturally, in the UAE, that's happened to me before. I'm like, hi, and of course, perhaps the lady doesn't want to shake hands. That's all fine with me. But it didn't bother me. I didn't feel that was socially unacceptable with you in that instance. But quirky's right. Look, I've got a lot of questions for you. One of the main reasons that we're trying to get to in this podcast is really to talk to people who are doing things differently. The surplus qualifies you for that. Your education qualifies you for that. And the quirkiness is on top. So you've already got 3. I don't mean to flatter you. But I guess I want to pick your brains for some wisdom, really. Things that you've managed to collect along the way. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. You've got plenty of time to think about it. What would you tell your younger self now? Looking back, what would you like to have, developed in your younger self, knowing what you know now?
I think confidence, but that imposter syndrome is so common for women. I'm sure you've seen the statistics. It might be a bit generic to say it, but there is ultimately a very gendered lens around this. So I think building up that sort of confidence to speak out, engage a little bit more, be a bit more vocal, and be a bit more curious, because sometimes when you're younger, depending on your context, curiosity is sometimes punished. It's seen as rebellion.
Yeah.
And you were talking about poetry earlier. There's a lot of actual like Bedouin and Egyptian poetry that touches on this very beautifully about women's place in society and this sort of submissive role that we play. And has it sort of evolved over time? Absolutely. Are we in a situation where women are in all sorts of positions and are able to engage with the sort of public world a lot more boldly? Absolutely. But I think there's a lot of, I suppose, intrinsic and internalized thoughts that we have, and that stopped me from pursuing a lot of potential really great opportunities for myself.
Because you feel as though you can't speak up. I mean, when I grew up, it was very much, it was the adults and it was the children, and the children were, you speak when you're spoken to.
Yeah, exactly.
Was it like that?
I suppose it's similar, yeah. Yeah, but I think it's also a matter of you don't want to be seen. Visibility is one, I think, that has to do with, well, if you want to be a respectable sort of individual, you have to be a bit more moderate in your views. You have to be slightly more quiet your cleverness. Being curious isn't necessarily a good thing. It's seen as, well, are you talking back and questioning authority? Where 99% of the cases, it's not the case. Kids are just curious.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I would have gone back and tried to perhaps, I suppose, worked on a little bit more seriously to sort of allow myself to have a bit more opportunities and not let, I suppose social norms dictate that as much.
There's a similarity between you and me, I think. I think I was probably at school, I was the annoying kid who'd put his hand up and say, well, why?
Why?
And, very often teachers had a lot to do, didn't want to get into the nuts and bolts, and it's just because of the way it is. Yeah, but why is that? Was that you as a kid, or was that what you wanted to be as a kid, just to find out more, just to know more?
Yeah, I was definitely a why all the time. And I remember my last why was I wasn't particularly good at maths.
Okay.
I was quite awful, actually. And there was a little bit of a block. I had a teacher, I think it was in 5th or 6th grade maybe. And I asked her, why is it like this? I couldn't quite figure it out. And I think we were doing early algebra or something. And she's like, well, you were very stupid. And you don't need to ask why because you're not going to get it. So stop questioning me and just, give up on this class. Ooh. And I still have some childhood friends that were in that classroom. And I was very lucky at that time. I had a very outspoken friend, and she decided to just, make a fuss about it and everything. So I'm glad I had good allies to sort of do that. But that sort of stuck with me, right? And that stopped me pursuing a lot of stuff that I wanted to because it was in my head that I have the self-limiting belief that I can't do maths. So I would actually shut down. If you asked me to add 2 and 2, I would know it, but I just shut down. But then, finally, when I kind of got over it and I had a bit more confidence, I mean, I'm doing a PhD in engineering now. I'm not that bad at maths. So
No.
it just shows the impact of what these self-limiting beliefs actually do to you. And it stops you from actually accomplishing more and becoming a bit more ambitious, in that sense.
Not your teacher's finest moment, that either, was
Oh,
it?
yeah, she was great, wasn't she?
Oh, what a
Teacher of the Year award.
Where is she now?
Good question.
A personal question for you. You are very highly educated. You have had some great success with the surplus. We've established that. What would success mean to you? How would you define it personally?
I would define it as being able to sort of instigate a small but meaningful paradigm shift. And what that looks like for me is there's perhaps a perspective that's being framed with surplus that looks like a business, but at the core of it is deeply philosophical, and it challenges our ideas of usefulness, self-worth. Perhaps it's my own personal projection of my own experiences in life. I don't know if we're going down the psychotherapy route, but that's something that I feel could really empower a lot of people and businesses to be able to make better decisions, not just for the climate, but for people too. There's actually a quote that I really love, and I might be misquoting it, but it's by Chico Mendes. And he says, environmentalism without class struggle is basically glorified gardening. So for us to be able to sort of bridge that gap between where the resources in the world are very much concentrated and allowing other echelons of society to be able to tap into that is ultimately in itself a sustainability revolution. Not in the sense of it's good for the environment, but fundamentally it's good for people and allows them to lead better quality lives.
Final question for the kind of 3 wisdom questions, if you like. Looking back at everything that we've talked about today, all the things you've done, what's the one takeaway, the one message that you hope anybody watching this now who's tuned in because Rana Hajirasouli is on this, what would you like somebody to take away from what you've said?
I'm not sure if there's an ultimate takeaway, but I think I'm going to go with something more generic and say, be kind. That's something that's really underestimated, right?
Nice.
Because it's something that could just ultimately change people's lives. If you have, a contact that you could share, make an introduction, share your lunch with somebody. These are the types of things that when we're talking about climate and these really pressing issues, people feel that they're very powerless. But there's generic takeaways from this, like, spend your money, hard-earned money wisely, don't support specific brands, and all the rest of this. But I think something you could do every day is just be a little bit more gentle because everybody is going through something, and you can have an enormous impact with the smallest gesture.
Last question. We ask this to everybody on Unboxed. What would you like to see happen or change or affect most in the world? What would you like to unbox, and why would you like to do it?
Does it have to be a specific thing, or could it be like a theoretical concept?
It can be anything you want it to be.
I think intersectional collaboration, because that means we are all individually working on specific problems. And if you look at all of the solutions that are out there, we have everything we need to be able to solve for world hunger, to solve for sort of financial gaps and disparities between SMEs and enterprises, for climate. There's policies out there, but everything is fragmented. So I think intersectional collaboration can just be as simple as picking up the phone and actually having a conversation with somebody who's a regulator or somebody who works in a different department. It's really surprising how, with the rise of all of this technology, we are so disconnected from each other, and everything is really based on tiny sound bites without any meaningful connection. So we could be connected, but actually we are far more disconnected, I think, emotionally, and I suppose in many ways, just not just emotionally, but in just many facets of this consideration. So I think that collaboration could be deep rooted, and it could implicate policy. It could change the way we look at things, the way that we do business. It can open up new opportunities for something more practical, like a chief resource officer. And resources doesn't just have to be stuff. It could be, your amazing experience hosting podcasts, and you could share that across, let's say, a policy and communication, how to communicate climate and sustainability more effectively. We have everything we need. We're just not collaborating deep enough to make it happen.
You think we don't talk to each other anymore?
That's a nice way of putting it too.
I think you might be right. Rana Hajirasouli is the founder. She's the CEO of The Surplus, 2 S's. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.